Welcome, everyone, to Nutri-iQ Radio. As always, we're going to be talking about food, fitness, and feeling good. My name is Steve Opalenik. I'm your special guest host for this week with my buddy Shaun Herr. And we're here to do a special collaboration of both of our podcasts. So I'm leading the introduction on his end, and you're about to hear from him right now.
Yeah, so I'll take it from there. Welcome also to the Break the Chains, Find Your Flame podcast, which is all about talking with people who have managed to break the chains that are holding them down in life and smash it from there. I think that's roughly the intro, but I winged it a little bit.
Adding some flair from across the sea with Smash It. So
Cool. So the way this guest duel kind of show has come about was last week. A show came out in the UK on the BBC with Freddie Flintoff, who is a cricketer, or used to be a cricketer, a very famous one in England. And it was about him living with bulimia for the past 20 years or something. Yeah. And I actually already had scheduled for Nutri-iQ Radio planned to talk about my own history with disordered eating, which came about when I was a personal trainer. And I wanted to talk about it to let other men know that this is a thing that happens. It's not something to be ashamed of. And the fact that the documentary came out last week seemed like a good time to pull it forward and talk about it now while it's on people's minds. And then at the same time, for today, me and Steve already had this time scheduled in to talk about similar but different things. We were going to do a different topic on talking about how nutrition affects your mental health, I think was the initial plan, was it?
Yeah, initially we were going to look at nutrition and how it's connected, and digestive health, how it's connected to mental health. And
yeah.
And I think it's with exactly what you're saying anyways, right? So I think that's why we came together and felt like we could do a really good conversation about it.
Yeah, because like we were just saying before we started recording, and like we said in the past couple of days, I've struggled with things in the past that I've now managed to overcome, really, and Steve has as well. And so the stars kind of just aligned with all of that timing. The documentary coming out, me having it lined up, us already having time scheduled in. And so here we are. We also thought it'd be pretty cool to cross over on each other's intros. So I guess we just go from here.
Like old school comics where you have like special guest stars, or
yeah.
You know, there were a couple times where DC Comics and Marvel Comics came together and had an all-out issue, and you know, Captain America against Superman and all this stuff too. So I feel like this is a good crossover for us, especially because we're so aligned in how we talk about things and our approach to it. Yeah. And, you know, you were on Break the Chains, Find Your Flame podcast, and I was on your podcast before. And I feel like we had some really good conversations about health, mental health, nutrition, and then just aspects of societal kind of confines that come into play with all that fun stuff. So
yeah,
with a good conversation.
Yeah, everyone loves a crossover episode.
Yeah. I guess what I'll say, so you've been open about your bulimia, your struggles with disordered eating, and so I'll kind of do an introduction on mine, because I've talked about it on my podcast a little bit, but so when I was younger, you know, basically my concept was I had a really hard time dealing with my emotions. When I was really upset or depressed or anxious, I would often turn to food, and felt awesome in that moment to eat a bunch of pizza or a bunch of, you know, Kit Kats were my jam. I like Kit Kats and Oreo cookies. And, you know, it really got to a point where it was beyond even just waiting for my emotions to like avoid them. It was just a habit and a routine. And so, you know, I found myself at 230 pounds at one point, way before I even found exercise, right? So none of that was really muscle. And so I just kept constantly going to food to try to solve my issues. And I think, when you talk about disordered eating, my specific diagnosis was emotional overeating disorder, which just really means that I turned to overeating in times of feeling emotional stress and concern, which I think is not uncommon for a lot of people out there,
Yeah.
especially now with COVID and things of that nature. And so, seeing that how we have that correlation going, I think this will be a really good conversation to talk about different aspects and topics. So
Yeah, what you were saying there about it being related to your sort of emotions, and that was when you would start overeating to try and cope with things like loneliness, things like that, stress. That's something that Freddie talked about in the documentary as well. He was saying, well, again, Nutri-iQ listeners might already know, but when he sort of came to popularity or stardom, I guess, in the papers for his sport, because he was very good. He was quite a big guy. He was a little bit heavier set than the other players and things like that. And as papers and magazines do, because they're awful, they like drilled him on it. They were calling him fat in the papers. They were saying, "Oh, did he fumble that because he is too big and stuff like that?" And he was saying, that obviously got to him, and he wanted to, get smaller to fit in more with the other players, and so that the papers couldn't say things like that anymore. And he started throwing up after he ate, and started exercising more as well, and that just then snowballed into full-blown bulimia. Which, for anyone listening that doesn't know, bulimia isn't just being sick after you eat.
right.
It's it's purging is the word, and that could be purging by throwing the food back up, or purging the calories kind of on the other end through exercise. So at one point in the documentary, he actually said, he exercises now like 9 or 10 times a week. And there's only 7 days in a week, so that's a lot. And
Still,
he even then like didn't realize that that was a lot of exercise, and that is part of the bulimia that he is still struggling with. But before we get more into that, anyway, just taking on the emotional side, because that was the same for me. So a brief overview for what happened with me was, I obviously, being a personal trainer, there's kind of a lot of pressures to look the part. You nobody wants to be told what to do by a fat PT, is kind of the thing you are told or led to believe, and so I was never super athletic, or especially in comparison to other members of the team. And at one point I thought, you know what, I'm going to get leaner, I'm going to see my abs again, and that'd be cool. So I started training with one of the other coaches from a different gym. He was sending me spreadsheets for what I should eat day to day. And I got into that, that kind of routine of measuring every single thing out to the gram, and cooking that, only having that. And that was the plan. And basically, I then didn't want to be that strict. And that led me, through one reason or another, towards binge eating, to counteract how strict that was. And I was also living alone at the time, and I think that did have a big impact, because living alone, I didn't get to see my family a lot for months and months, and didn't really have any friends outside of work. And I think that also played a part in it for me, the loneliness. So it's been interesting listening to Freddie talk about that, the emotional side, and obviously you talking about your emotional sort of initial aspect of it, and realizing that mine was as well. And a lot of the time we talk about emotional eating and that leading to overeating, and it's hard to give people examples, or for people to kind of visualize it or understand it. But that's 3 examples right there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard in the sense. Well, a couple of things that you said that I feel like really stick out with what we're talking about is this concept of, going to be trained by someone, they need to look the part. And in reality, it's, if you look at some of the best coaches in any kind of athletic situation, is that, yeah, you got some coaches that look the part who are massive or leaned out and kind of just like Brad Pitt looking motherfuckers, right? And so you're like, oh, they're probably pretty good. But if you look at like a lot of strength coaches too, and people who work with these athletes, like, it's not necessarily that you have to be super lean. It's just knowing how to build and collaborating and get the best out of the person that you're working with. And I think there is a lot of pressure and society wise to look a certain way, depending on what jobs you have or what gender you are or gender you identify as, is this concept of, oh, you should look this way, or you should replicate what people look like Brad Pitt in his heyday. You should look like that if you're a man, or be smaller and not heavier set. And we see it in all different kinds of expectations of society. So that's one component, right? And then you add to it, you're not comparing yourself to yourself. You're comparing yourself to other metrics that just don't add up. You and I are never going to look exactly the same, no matter how hard we train, because we're different people. No, I could work my ass off and never look like Brad Pitt, but I already kind of do, so no big deal there. But that's kind of the thing. Is like, I think sometimes we have these constructs in our mind of what fitness looks like without really spending time figuring out what fitness looks like for us as individuals. And then, like you're saying, is being so restrictive in how you eat only leads to that eventual binge of that, or that lapse or relapse back to like a disordered type of eating. Because, sometimes if you're too rigid, you don't bend, you're not flexible, you just snap. And that's kind of one of the things that would happen to me every time I tried to diet and get away from it. I had no idea what I was doing. I would go like, oh, fad diets, let's check it out, right? Like, oh, this is how people are telling me I should eat. I'm gonna eat the Atkins diet, or I'm gonna eat, I need to eat salads, or never really paying attention to my salads would always have like 5 cups of salad dressing on top of it, and like a chunk of bread on the side that was just like half the loaf of a bread. And I'm like, oh, it's bread and salad, it's good, I know, even I think we talked one time on the podcast too, is even this concept of what it is to lose weight and to be healthy. They're so skewed because, when I talk to, so I'm a mental health counselor, and so that, but for your listeners, they might not know that. So when I talk with clients a lot of times, and we talk about healthy diet and nutrition and things of that nature, a lot of times they say, no, I eat really healthy. I have a salad. I'm like, salad in and of itself is not the representation of what healthy eating looks like. And so we have to have a conversation, and then inevitably the same process that I'm sure you've gone through in your life and I've gone through with, like, okay, what is the diet? What is the right diet? Is it paleo? Is it, carnivore diet? Is it, any of these fad diet, keto diet, like all that stuff that's out there, Weight Watchers, all that stuff. There's so much of it out there too, that you get lost, and then you're trying to get back on track with something. You reach for that. A lot of those diets are restrictive. I know we've talked about that before. Mm-hmm. And then you do it for a couple weeks, maybe a month or two, and then you just snap because it's too much. I can't hold on to this shift because I haven't eased myself into healthy eating. I've just kind of tried to force it.
Yeah. Something you mentioned there, where you were talking about, the pressures to look like Brad Pitt or look a certain way, basically get bigger a lot of the time if you're a guy, or to get smaller if you're a girl. I don't know how many people listening, will have heard of this term. I don't think it's a recognized kind of medical term, but for men, and something that comes up all the time when guys start to go to the gym, is this idea of bigorexia.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I don't think that's medical, but
no, I don't
yeah.
think it's medical, but that's basically, yeah, this idea that, once you start going to the gym and once you start gaining muscle and once you start seeing yourself get a little bit bigger, your mind kind of runs away with it. And your self-image, like with a lot of, fully fledged eating disorders, your self-image of what you see in the mirror doesn't fully reflect what is actually in the mirror or what other people see, because you're getting bigger, you're gaining muscle, you are gaining size, but you never feel big enough. You never feel like you have gotten that much bigger. And that in itself for a lot of guys is, again, it's not a fully medical term, bigorexia, but it's the same kind of, um what's the word I'm looking for, the same kind of perspective from the individual. What I see isn't what is actually going on, and things are skewed in how I'm looking at it. Somebody on the show actually mentioned that as well, and I know I was like that when I was at uni. I could never get big enough. I always had to keep lifting more or lifting heavier or trying to eat the right way to get to that size. And I think, the statistics on it that they showed in the documentary was that 1 in 4 people with eating disorders are male. And where eating disorders are often seen as a female thing, girls get eating disorders. So that in itself kind of gives guys that, not so much pressure, but that feeling like they can't talk about it or that they shouldn't be struggling with it. That's part of the issue. But 1 in 4 are still a lot of people. It's not a girl's thing.
Bigorexia is not the clinical term, but there is a clinical term that replicates this called body dysmorphia. Bigorexia is a type of body dysmorphia, right? The concept is you see a flaw in your body that other people can't see, and you hyper focus and you perseverate on that flaw and try to fix it no matter what. So for some people, it's getting bigger, right? Getting that Brad Pitt muscle building. For me, it was like leaning out, right? I'd always kind of look in the mirror at different angles and struggle like, oh man, I still feel like I was where I was obese and, I had a gut and things of that nature. Other people, it may be a nose, it may be like small hands, it may be whatever it is. It's just a concept of flaw that you see in that hyper focus on it. And I think a lot of that stuff too is self-esteem and lack of control and really trying to fixate it. A lot of these eating disorders come from those kind of things where you don't feel in control, and so you reach outside of yourself to try to establish some control. But in reality, what you're doing is you're kind of making it worse because you're avoiding, the inherent thing that's making you do that. And I think we see it with a bunch of, you were talking about the documentary. He was feeling like he had no control over the perception of what the media was saying about him. So he tried to take control by exercise and diet and routine like that, which is initially not inherently bad, except that it became obsessive and it became exaggerated. We see it with addictions, this eating disorders or food addictions, or addictive behavioral addictions that happen. So they're very akin to drug addictions or anything of that nature. Shopping addictions or technology addictions, same kind of concept is feeling like it does something for you in that moment. And then, okay, that helps, let's keep going. And I think with bigorexia, it's kind of like, oh, the more I go, I have to solve this issue, and I'm in control because I'm putting the effort in. I'm still doing it, but you'll never get to that high level that you want to be because you're always comparing it to something different.
Yeah, there's always somebody else that's bigger than you that you now need to be bigger than, or something like that. Yeah, something that they mentioned in the show, just off something you mentioned there. I've lost it. Oh yeah, Freddie was talking about how it was a control thing for him. A lot of the time he felt like, well, I can't control any of that, but I can control this. I can control when I be sick. And obviously when you say that out loud, it's like, that's not normal. But it's that thing of, you know, he said it then went into, I was doing it and things got better. And so in his mind, that then associated those two things. You know, I'm being sick after I eat and these things are getting better. So that probably has something to do with that. And I realized as I was listening to that, that I had the same idea with what I was doing when I was a PT. So I was eating in this way and I was being really structured. And, you know, I let my clients know that I was working with one of the other coaches and, you know, the plan was to get leaner. I was getting up at earlier, like 6 a.m., earlier than I was before, getting into the gym to do fasted cardio, which we now know is useless, like doesn't really make a difference, but that was the thing at that time. So I was getting up early to do fasted cardio. I was being really strict on my diet. I was sticking to the plan. When in reality, I was going home and making this like hugely calorific meal every time of, it was basically porridge, but I made it with coconut milk, like the tinned coconut milk. So that is loads of calories. And then I'd load it up with cashew nuts and raisins. So I don't even know how much it would have been, but it was a lot. And I knew it was a lot. But what happened for me was I would do that. And then I would see my clients, I'd see the other people in the gym, and they'd comment that I was getting leaner.
Yeah.
So in my head, I then went, all right, well, I can follow this strict stuff that Josh is giving me, but I can still binge out in the evening and still get results. Awesome. When, you know, now the way we coach with Nutri-iQ is you can do the good stuff. I mean, not being that restrictive anyway, but you can do the nutritious stuff and then have the treats and stuff.
Right. Yeah.
And it's all fine. Like it doesn't, like no part of it has to be hidden. You can put it all into the same, you know, overarching plan and still get results. So like I said, I noticed for me that there was that thing of, this isn't ideal what I'm doing, but I'm still getting some kind of result. So let's just keep doing it because it seems to be fine.
Yeah.
But
It's
it's not
like
ideal.
you convince yourself you found like this universal kind of loophole that will give you everything you want.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, yeah, it's not the best, but there's this loophole. I'll still get results and I can still eat how I want to. And so you kind of connect to that. And then in reality, it's, you know, a lot of times it's just like a small period of time that actually works, because that's not even bringing into the account of like the fact that you shouldn't be, you know, throwing up so much because there's, you know, medical things that go wrong with that.
Yeah.
And then two, it's just like, it's, you know, the tolerance and the resilience isn't being built to achieve a goal. It's like a cheap way to get where you want to be. But it feels really like it is achieving something in those moments at the beginning of it. And that's why it keeps happening, because you're like, I am getting something out of this. Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's keep going with it. Let's see where it goes. And then by the time you get to a point where you start realizing like, okay, this is going in a really bad way, it's hard to break that cycle because you've become reliant on it. I mean, I was, you know, some of the worst parts was we would get pizza. We had this thing where every Friday night we would get pizza, my family. And we would do it during Lent too, because my family is Christian and religious. And so we would have no meat. So we'd get pizza, like cheese pizza or veggie pizza. My dad would always get fish and French fries. And so I would eat a normal amount when everyone was there. And then when they went and watched TV, I would take a couple slices of pizza and maybe some leftover French fries, and you go outside or go in the basement. Oh, I have to go get something, and just kind of binge down there, because I knew what would happen. But in that moment, like, I didn't want people to see what I was doing, because again, it was, well, I know that it's wrong. So I'm kind of being shameful in that sense of finding a different way to do it and achieve that. I think looking back at that makes me really sad, because I know my family and I know the people around me who would have been really supportive. But again, I thought I had that loophole. I thought, oh, they, as long as they don't know, I'll get to where I want to be. But all that stuff was just, it was very just temporal, like very like temporary, and not really the long-term generative kind of concept that really, when you take a step back at nutrition and exercise, is what you're looking for. That generative kind of progressive level of where you want to be.
Yeah, and I had the same kind of thing, and I think it's a kind of an identifying feature, if you like, of a lot of disordered eating, in that it becomes secretive.
Yep.
So, we know with a lot of people, obviously, with the bulimia, for example, like Freddie Flintoff, trying to hide being sick, for example. With yourself, then it was hiding that you were eating the extra pizza and the fries. And I had the same thing as well, because again, I wanted to look like I was doing everything right and look like I was kind of living or practicing what I was preaching with my clients. So, I would often go to Aldi, and I was just loving these flapjacks because they were so like syrupy and moist and not what I was supposed to be having. Yeah, and they were amazing. So I would get those while I got my shopping of all the clean stuff from a plan with Josh. And then I would sit in the car and eat like one or two of those, just hoping that nobody from the gym walked past the car and saw me and think, what were you doing? I thought you were on this plan with Josh. And again, like, then I would think about when I got home, what I was going to do, because there was nobody there, and how I was going to, I would play it out in my head, the whole process of, using a tin opener to open up the tin of coconut oil, use my protein shaker to mix it all up because it comes out in a kind of weird consistency. And I would play through all of that in my head before I did it. And then like you say, it was a big part of it was that nobody was there. Like, I didn't want anybody to know. I didn't want anybody to think that I was kind of a bad PT because I wasn't doing those right things. Like I say, that secret eating, a lot of people call it secret eating, is often a feature with these things.
Yeah, and there's also that ritualization of that process of thinking about it, and like, okay, and then I'm going to do this, and so it's not like it's just one thing during the course of the day. It becomes a focus of the whole day. Like, how do I get this? How do I make sure no one sees me? How do I can't wait until that alone time where I can do this and kind of feast on this and be alone and be in my glory of how that feels to consume that much. And I mean, I think that's one aspect too of why food can do this, to replicate this stuff, is because food, kind of tying into what originally you and I had planned, is like food is loaded with these amino acids that build neurotransmitters in our brain that make us feel good or calm us down or give us a sense of reward. And I think sometimes like these fatty foods do that, cheeses do that, glutinous foods do that, like carbs in general do that. They help make serotonin, which is that, that feel good kind of chemical that we talked about with depression, which is missing. They make GABA, which calms our body down from that anxious response, and they make dopamine, which is that reward system. Like cheese is a big one, dairy is a big one with that reward system, dairy and sugar, because that's hard to come off as you can tell from the dopamine we had gotten through the eating. Is, people always tell me if they're trying to make a change in diet, and not that I really do too much weight loss conversations. I do talk about, inflammation in the body with people and how it affects mental health, and sometimes elimination diets to see if something they're eating is kind of offsetting anxiety and depression. And a couple times people were like, yeah, I tried that. I did feel really good for 2 weeks. I usually give them like 1 to 2 weeks to try to see, and then we try something else. And it felt good for 2 weeks. I'm like, okay, so are you trying to keep on that? No. It's cheese, man. It's cheese. Yeah, I get it. But if it's making you feel like shit, like probably you should. But that's the thing. It's like they don't understand why dairy can be so hard or why sugar is so hard. It's not just how it tastes, which is also really good. Like I don't eat cheese because dairy upsets my stomach, but I love cheese. Like if I could eat it without being watched, or if I could not have that, I would probably eat a ton more cheese than I ever had because I miss it. But I know how it makes me feel. And I also know that's a slippery slope for me. If I start eating cheese again, I'm going to want cheese more because of the dopamine response, right? Not just the taste, it's what it does to the brain chemistry. Same with sugar, right? There are people who can kind of kick sugar, added sugar, and then the minute they have it again, it starts that recycle of things, right? And not that you need to completely kick sugar out, but I'm saying for some people, it's an important thing to look into, to pay attention to, at least, given an individual kind of background. But I think that's something that also feeds into what we're talking about. It's the ritual, the outcome, but also what this food we're eating. Like you seem to always have that like porridge kind of go-to, because that was like, it gave you a lot of probably dopamine from eating it that way. That's something to think about too when we're talking about, okay, we have this, how do we start stepping away from it? It's not as easy as just not doing it. There is a level of healing that needs to be done to start shifting away.
And I was about to ask on that, what was your kind of, how did you start to repair your relationship? But just before we get into that, I think it's worth mentioning that stuff we're talking about there, of how the food makes us feel, that combination of sugar and fat. This is something that I actually talked about recently on Nutri-iQ radio, but it'll probably be good to recap and for your listeners to hear as well. We often find it really hard to not overeat those processed foods, like the flaming Cheetos, the Reese's Pieces, whatever it is. I'm trying to think of some like really good American examples of things that kind of cross over. But those foods that basically, you get to the bottom of the bag and you're surprised you've already got there. It's important to know that it's not your fault that you got to the bottom without realizing. The food is literally designed to make that happen. Like food companies know how your brain works and how all this biochemistry works, and how if they can create something that basically melts in your mouth and has the right blend of sugar, salt, and fat, it's just absolutely irresistible. And so if you eat it all, you need to buy more. Like, that's the way it's made.
Yeah, I mean, I think and this goes to, so before we started recording, Shaun and I were talking, and he was like, well, you got a lot of stuff going on over there in America. And we're like, yep, it's like every week there's 2 new things that kind of come up. But this goes beyond just the food industry, but, over here, the medical industry, the healthcare industry, all this stuff is big business. And I'm going to get on a small soapbox here and kind of talk about it. And as soon as you start introducing business and money into the equation, it stops being about what it should really be about. And that's like, for food, it's a good taste, but also health and energy for the body, right? It stops being about that, and it starts becoming more about how we can make money off this, and how do we get more things sold, and how do we get these addictive things and things, so that it sounds like it's a conspiracy theory, but it's true. Like, go down the cereal aisle in any grocery store or any market that you're in, and you'll see brand new versions of cereals with buzzwords that replicate health, but really don't mean anything because it's still cereal, right?
Health halo foods.
And so it gets your attention, but then also, there are things like chocolate frosted flakes now, right? Where before frosted flakes were just, it was just corn flakes with sugar encrusted, pretty much.
Yeah.
The general idea. But now they have to have chocolate frosted flakes. You got to add a new dynamic, and that becomes more appealing. And Fruity Pebbles and all this stuff. And I think what you're talking about is like this business aspect and the additives and all this stuff is one of the things about processed food that makes it, to me, really unappealing. And besides the fact that half the time we don't know what's in it. I mean, look over here in America, you guys have Subway over there? Subway, yeah. Over here, our Subway bread had like 28 additives to it. And one of those additives was yoga mat material, right? And it was a big deal to get it out of our Subway because everyone was up in arms like, what is happening? Like, why is this chemical to make yoga mats in our bread?
Like, yeah, it's just bread. Like, we've been doing it for a long time. Like, right. It's okay.
And then you would look at the UK, you look at some European countries who also have Subway, and they would have like 12 things in it, and they didn't have yoga mat thing. And and part of it's because America is so big business that it's like, okay, let's just add a bunch of stuff into it because we want to make it more addictive. We see it with video games, we see it with TV, we see it with everything. But the food one's really, really tough because it is about putting products out there that have no nutritional value and getting people addicted.
Yeah. And on that example just of Subway as well, even though it is, a lot of food products are different over here, there's less sugar in a regular Coke over here than there is over there. Just on the example of Subway, in Ireland last week, I think it was, their Supreme Court ruled that Subway bread couldn't be classified as bread because there was too much sugar in it. And you're like, I don't even think sugar is an ingredient for bread. Like, how has that happened? Like, and it's crazy. Like, even though, like you say, our food standards are tighter and are stricter, that still happens, and you wonder why. Is obviously that extra sugar in the bread is going to make it sweeter, is going to make it that bit more tasty, but you can't quite work out why when you're just eating it. And eventually somebody has to go, it's because there's a lot of sugar in it, mate.
You don't even think about it. I mean, I talk to people a lot because working with kids with ADHD, nutrition and diet's really important, and not just the sugar content, but additives like food coloring and things of that process. And there's a concept of these kids would do better on a more protein-based diet, not like excessively, but like real proteins, because they have an amino acid called tyrosine, which produces dopamine, which with ADHD we know lack of dopamine is lack of attention. So like having more protein-based diets can be helpful. But kids generally tend to go for like carbs. Like I was saying when I was checking in with kids before, I asked this one kid, "Oh, how are you doing on, like eating healthy?" It's like, "Oh, pretty good. I had a bagel for breakfast. I had mac and cheese for lunch, and we're getting pizza tonight." And I'm like, "And how is that? What?" In my head. But if I put myself back as me being a kid, I'd be like, "Yeah, there's some veggies and some of that stuff. And, there's cheese." But I do think that's kind of a weird dynamic that happens a lot too, is that this concept of just, I even lost my train of thought, to be honest, just where I was going with that. But really, the additives things is that like food dyes, like you're talking about sugar and things, and you'd be surprised what's in it, and like sugar, even in milks, like low fat milks and things of that nature. You look at some of the stuff that has like food coloring in it that you would never expect to have food coloring in it, because it seems like a natural product, and it's in a lot of stuff. Well, at least over here, it's in a lot of stuff for sure. And that stuff directly has an impact on how we feel.
Yeah, and it could, like I say, when you think that would be the natural color, it could even be that the coloring is added to emphasize the color, to make it look more like you think it should. But
Like, have you ever taken oranges and actually blended them? It's
Yeah.
way paler than some of the orange juices that are out there. But
Yeah.
some orange juices have that in it to make it more orange, or the juices especially, right? It's like, oh, you're supposed to be this rich color. Like, no, just give me what the actual juice looks like.
Yeah.
So that's what
Yeah.
I want. I
Yeah.
want this.
I remember when I went to Kenya, we got Fanta there. Obviously, it's a drink that's pretty much everywhere.
Yeah.
And we were all like, oh my God, this tastes so different. Like, it's so much nicer. And it was way more orange. But they told us, yeah, it tastes different because there's stuff in it that is illegal in the UK. Like, we don't have it in our food. And like you say, that's why it was like that. There was more stuff in it to make it more orange, to make it more
Yeah.
like you think it should be, which just isn't needed. But yeah, to go back to what I was going to ask you before then,
Yeah, sure.
to start that process of healing, and I only kind of worked out today, I think, or remembered today, how I kind of sort of flicked that switch and started to get out of what I was doing. How did you start then that process of healing, of getting out of the binge eating? You mentioned you tried a couple of
Yeah.
diet approaches and it didn't work. So, what came next?
It was a hard, like, I think there's no definitive uh, thing that set me on the path. I think it was a lot of trial and error. And I think the biggest thing for me was real awareness as to what was happening. I knew that I was doing something that wasn't um, good, right? That's why I was doing the secretive eating. That's why I was hiding.
Yeah.
But I think I really didn't start to heal from that until I got to the understanding why that was happening, right? Like, what was it that was driving it? Because back in the day, I was just like, well, I just don't have any control over my eating, and I like pizza, and I like chicken tenders and fries, and I like this stuff because it tastes good. So it's just really, I'm just choosing to do it, and so I should have that self-control. And then I would do well for a little bit, and then snap and kind of go back into it. And then, I'd do it one day and it'd be like, okay, well, I already kind of screwed up. I ate Friday night, I had pizza, weekend screwed. So like, let me just eat for the weekend. I'll start again Monday. And then, oh, there's leftover pizza Monday morning. Let me just eat that. So that's out of the way. Oh, now the week screwed up, right? And it's the slippery slope of how to do that. And I think really the healing came to a head for me when I realized why I was eating. I was avoiding my emotions. I wasn't, like we talked about in a podcast, I wasn't honoring them. I was kind of avoiding them. I wasn't confronting anything that I needed to. I was living a comfortable life by not dealing with those things. And so I was like, okay, well, if this is connected, like I have to start making some changes. So that's when I started exercising a little bit more to kind of regulate my nervous system from anxiety or depression. Mm-hmm. When I started challenging myself to do things I originally would stay away from because it was too anxiety provoking, talking to new people, really bringing awareness to what I was doing and taking some steps to manage that. And then generally what I found was I could start making different choices in food. I could notice people talk about intuitive eating a lot, right? Mm-hmm. But I think you said to me one time when we were talking about it, it's like, yeah, that's great, but it's shit if you don't know what that means. And I think that's true. It's like people always talk about intuitive eating and how important it is, but they never give you the skills to do it. Yeah. They're always like, just eat intuitively. Yeah. And I've had clients who've said that, they went to nutritionists, they're like, just eat intuitively. And they were like, what the fuck does that mean? I don't know how to do that. I can't just do it. Yeah. But I think for me, it really became about like, okay, why am I reaching for this other slice? Am I actually full? Yeah, I'm kind of full. Is it an emotional thing? Is it looking for comfort? Like, what am I doing here? And slowly, like, and it's hard to build that. So it would start with like that conversation, and I would be like, nope, I need this. And I'd eat it. And then after the fact, I'd be like, well, that was really for comfort. All right, so the next time when I approach it the same way, I'm going to try to remember my processing after the fact and bring it to this. And through repetition and that emotional response of like, hey, that actually makes me feel better because I'm having some control where I felt like I had none. it started letting me make that choice more and more.
Mm-hmm.
And then it slowed down that, what I call the difference between relapse and lapse is, hey, if you eat like shit one day for one meal, that's cool. That's okay. Just don't let it completely get you in that cycle of, okay, the weekend's screwed, the week's screwed, because that's full blown like relapse. It's okay to have a lapse. It's okay to eat that way, but like to get back on track. And I think when we talk about this stuff, it's always like relapse versus being on the diet completely. And you alluded to it with like how you guys do it with your company of like, hey, you make healthy choices and you can eat like shit sometimes. That's okay. Have that treat, right? Treat, like, you know, Parks and Rec say, treat yourself, right? Have that built in, because that's going to go a longer way from you than like completely cutting out all treats and then binging the treats later on. So through awareness, through processing and really honoring emotions, and then making that small conversation come up when I'm doing it to say, okay, do I really need this? And then finding other ways to accomplish that feeling of connection or that feeling of comfort, right? So reaching beyond just like, okay, I don't need food to do it. I don't need drugs to do it. I don't need alcohol to do it at this point. I can actually do it through meditation or through, you know, monitored exercise or through coloring or reading or whatever it is that makes me feel really good about myself in that moment. So I'd flip the script on you and say, like, you said you just remembered recently, right? Like, what was your process like moving forward from that?
Well, for me, like I said, I knew that I was sitting in the car eating the flapjacks, hoping nobody would see me. I knew that I didn't want anybody to see me because I wanted to look like I was doing the right thing. And I think part of it was, like you said, the general awareness that that wasn't good, that I shouldn't be doing this. You know, I think I spoke to one of the other trainers and said, you know, like, I'm doing this, but then I'm going home and I'm just eating loads of food. And over time, it got more than just that porridge concoction.
Right.
You know, it became the porridge concoction plus cheese on toast plus toast. So like cheese on toast and toast. and I would plan the whole thing, and I'm really particular with my food. Like, people always comment on it, and they always comment on how when I get a meal, I kind of analyze it and make a game plan in my head of how I'm going to tackle it. And then I really precisely still now, and people always laugh, like, I'll take a little bit of that and a little bit of this and a bit of that and put all that on the fork and then eat that. And then I'll do that with the next bit and go on.
Yeah, I got something to add to that, but I have to pee real quick. I'll be right back.
Okay. Like I was saying, I'm really particular with how I eat and how I kind of assemble my fork, and people always comment on it, especially if it's kind of a new person seeing or observing me eat for the first time, and they're like, what is this? It's always funny, and I'm just like, I don't know, I just enjoy eating like this. And I've literally, while you went to pee, just thought to myself, me and my girlfriend and my dad went out for a meal the other week, and Ellis said to my dad, have you ever noticed how Shaun eats? Because she comments on it all the time. She thinks it's fascinating, it's hilarious. And it just doesn't bother me. It's just what I do. But she said, have you noticed how he eats and like assembles his fork? Like, when did that start? And I've literally just now thought to myself, because of how that particularness and how that ritualization that we were talking about before starts with that disordered eating, I've just now thought, is that when that started? Because, you know, I can't think of a particular time when I didn't eat my food that way. And I'm just wondering, is that how that started? That's just a random point of reflection that I might have just stumbled upon.
Oh yeah, that's interesting.
But yeah, it could be. But yes, like I was saying, I'm really particular with how I put things together, and maybe it started then, maybe it didn't. And you know, I kind of knew that I shouldn't be being as strict as I am with the clean food and then binging out with this other stuff at night, hiding it, hoping nobody sees. and then still hoping people think I'm doing the right thing. And I generally knew that things shouldn't be that way. Again, especially being a personal trainer, I think I kind of went a bit meta on myself because my frame of mind was, right, I'm doing this because I don't want other people to see that I'm doing it, and I'm hiding it for that reason, but I'm still getting results, which I do want people to see. But then I think something in my brain tripped and went, hold on, if you want to be an example to people, if you want to look like you're doing the right thing, the best way to do that is to stop doing this and
Right.
actually do things the right way and act and get out of this. Like that is the best way to serve your clients and to serve those people and to show that, look, I've dealt with this and I've got out of it now, because if I can do that, then I can understand their struggles better. And
Right.
so I think for me wanting to be a better coach, that kind of prompted me to get out of it. But then I think there was also a triggering event that eating all of that one night, I did end up making myself sick. Not like in a purging kind of way, just because I ate so much, I threw up. And I think when that happened, I was like, this has gone too far. Like I can't be doing this if I'm going to the point of eating so much I throw up. So I think those two things for me are what prompted me to really start trying to fix it.
Right.
And so then once I had decided that I was going to, the first thing I did was I emailed Josh the next day and I was like, look, mate, really sorry, but I can't do this anymore. Like, I don't think it's right for me. I've, I think I actually said to him, I've fallen into, you know, some issues with how I'm eating and it doesn't feel right. So we're gonna have to call it a day. Um, and he was just like, yeah, mate, that's cool. No worries. And I don't know, I kind of worried that he would then think, oh, we've been a little bitch for, just follow the plan. Do you know what I mean? But
Yeah.
that in itself, you know, Josh is a brilliant coach for bodybuilders, for girls doing bikini prep and all of that. You know, he's great at what he does, and I'm sure he does it in a good way. But for me, just in general, as kind of like a side note on the fitness industry in general, when I joined the PT company I worked for, it was almost like and I never did it, but I noticed it happened with most new trainers that joined. It was almost like a rite of passage that you either did a bodybuilding show or a bikini show, or you did the same prep but for a photo shoot. And I just never wanted to do it. You know, when I first joined, I was still going big on the bigorexia. I still wanted to be Mr. Olympia and all that, but I never quite got to that point. But I noticed that all of the trainers that came in, loads of them ended up doing that and following that process. And if anybody doesn't know a bodybuilder and hasn't witnessed what they have to do to get to that level, it
Yes.
is hard and they are miserable. Honestly, like as much as you might follow them on Instagram and it looks all happy and perky and look how lean I am and here's this meal I'm having, look at my cheat meal, like it all looks on the surface like a lot of social media like it's a really cool thing to do. When I saw them day to day coming into work trying to deal with clients who had their own issues, you know, they they were miserable. You know,
Yeah.
again, because they were cutting out those carbs, they weren't getting that serotonin. You know, that's probably going to be a big part of it, like you were saying. And they were always thinking, right, when's my next meal? What's my next meal? Oh, I've got this 2 calorie jelly pot for a little snack. I'm so excited for it. And I was like, that's not normal. Like
No.
you shouldn't be looking forward to a 2 calorie jelly pot. You know what I mean? And they'd be chewing gum all day just to have the feeling of eating something in their mouth. And they'd be really cold because they were really lean and you know body fat keeps you warm, so they'd have loads of layers on and just all these different things. And I just looked at them and thought, I don't want to do that. And you know, they do that for the same reasons I ended up doing what I was doing. they want to look the part. They want to have those photos to show the clients, look what I can do. I can do this for you. And, it's not good. And, I wanted to mention this stuff about the fitness industry and how, I fell into it one way and they fall into it another way, just to kind of let, regular people who aren't in the fitness industry know that if you're struggling with food, we all do. Again, like, it's our job to have a good relationship with food. And so many people that you follow probably are hiding some not very good relationships with food. Yeah, it's important to know that as a regular person, we all struggle.
Or they've gone through that process of having to figure out, like, they're either in it or they've gone through it, because I think it's hard to not have that. My side of the family, like, we've historically had some issues with overeating and being a little bit of heavier in nature. And we joke around with my brother-in-law, because he does powerlifting, and big guy, like, really strong guy. And, like, I remember I went over there to see my sister and him, and they cooked steak for dinner, and me and my sister were like, boom, destroyed the steak, right? Because, like, big fans of it. He was like, oh, I'm really struggling to finish the steak. And it was interesting to me, because I spent so much of my time looking at my own past and my disordered eating that, like, sometimes it's hard to see the other side, where sometimes people have to eat a ton to get to that level, to get big, like we were talking about, or to get stronger, or just to put on weight. And so there are all these weird complications that exist with it. But I think, the fitness industry and historically deals with the one about, like, overeating or being heavier, and it doesn't show the other side of things too. So I'm glad you brought that up. I really think it's an important message. But I also like to put out there too that anyone listening, right, to what we're talking about, struggling, try to get to the point where you can reach out and talk to someone about this stuff, because that's generally where the healing can happen. Talk to a therapist, talk to a loved one, talk to someone in the know, call a hotline, because the body dysmorphia and the eating, there are those statistics of, like, 1/4 men, 3/4 women, I think. But again, it's not a stereotype. It's like, and then it doesn't take into non-binary peoples where they fall in line. And we talk about bigorexia. A lot of guys have that, but some women have that too.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Some guys want to get smaller, and some, so it's multi-level, multifaceted. And I think, that's one of the reasons we did this today. I think is to put some of this out there and talk about our perspectives, because you don't hear it a lot. You don't really, from fitness industries, or just guys in general, don't really talk about eating disorders or body dysmorphia as well. So, I'm hoping that this can be a service to other people too, and they can hear this and kind of say, oh, okay, so people have it. It's not as hidden as, because that's the thing about, like, behavioral addictions or addictions of any kind, is like this lack of connection, this isolation, right?
Yeah.
Because you're holding a secret and you don't want to share it with people, and so you start isolating yourself, and it makes the addictive behaviors bigger.
Yeah.
And so reach out, talk to people, even if you can't talk about the stuff right away, like, connect with people. Try to be with, like, a group of people or some people you can really connect to, and really push yourself not to take that isolative kind of way.
Yeah.
So it makes it worse.
Yeah, no, a few things on what you were just saying there. I had another statistic written down from the show. So you mentioned again that the 1 in 4 people struggling with eating disorders are male, but also 60% of them don't seek professional help. So then the majority of people the majority of men who do struggle don't seek help. And, like you were saying, reach out to someone, reach out to a professional. If you can't, call a hotline. I would say even just speak to a friend that you trust and just talk it out. It doesn't have to be a serious conversation, because, you guys listening have been listening to me and Steve just generally talking about our past and our experiences. And I've realized that maybe my weird way of particular eating has come from my disordered eating in the past. You know, you just, these things just come out, and you, when those pennies drop, it can sometimes be enough to make you go, oh, do you know what? I do tend to do that kind of binge eating, or to start overeating when I'm feeling lonely. Actually, now that, you know, if I reflect back on it, and like I say, sometimes that's enough. Just a conversation with a friend that you trust, um, and those realizations. You know, a tool that I often give to people is like a food feelings diary. I don't know if
Yeah.
you do anything similar. It's, you know, get a notebook, you know, do it on your phone, whatever. But it's the same kind of thing Steve was talking about before, and it's similar to what I do in my head now. You know, whenever you have something to eat, uh, you know, just write down how you feel after it. Do you feel satisfied? When you reach for a snack, you know, write down, how am I feeling right now? Am I feeling lonely? Am I feeling tired? Am I just bored? And if you have things written down, you can start to see patterns,
Yeah.
and then
Exactly.
you go, oh yeah, that penny has dropped. I do tend to eat when I'm bored. So like you were saying, Steve, what can I do when I get bored? You know, maybe I'll read a book, maybe I'll um, call somebody. You know, that can work if it's feeling bored, or if you're feeling lonely when it happens. You know,
Yeah.
there's all kinds of different ways to
Yeah,
uh,
I do something
solve it.
similar. It's called the food mood diary, right?
Yeah.
And do the same thing, just kind of monitor and like, okay, I felt good on that coffee at 3 o'clock, but then by 4 o'clock I felt like shit. Well, that
Mm.
coffee had a bunch of sugar in it, so just noticing those patterns. Um, oh, there was one thing. So when you were talking about your particular way of eating, um, I'm working on this article I haven't put out yet, but it should be out pretty soon. I just have to find a way to tie the end on. But it's the concept of paying attention to your taste buds to really notice when we're talking about the awareness, to really notice when you're full. Because I watched this documentary on competitive eating um, a while ago. I think it was a 4th of July. It was like the Coney Island kind of hot dog eating competition. And I noticed that a lot of the people who were doing that hot dog eating competition would have something sweet near them, like Skittles or some kind of candy or some sugar, like soda or something of that nature. And I thought it was weird because it's like, why would you add stuff to what you're eating? You're trying to
Yeah.
74 hot dogs. And then I listened to this podcast and they were talking a lot about how there's something called palate fatigue in your mouth. And so if you eat a lot of the same flavor, your body's gonna be like, that's enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
too much, right? And so until you're full and you can't physically kind of eat anymore. But so what some of these competitive eating people do is they add a new flavor, and then their body's like, oh, okay, this is new. We can eat more of that, and so it kind of tricks their body into eating more,
Right.
even though not really listening to that intuitiveness of like, hey, motherfucker, we're full right now. Like, don't eat more food. Um, and so the article I'm writing is about that, but also about like, okay, so pay attention to how you're eating, right? If you're eating one thing, like a bunch of the same flavor, and then you add something like a dessert. So if you're having like a lot of salty foods for dinner, and then you add a dessert, you're kind of biohacking your body to eat more food and consume more because it's a different flavor
Yeah.
of your 5 flavors on the taste bud. So just an interesting thing I was thinking about when you're talking about constructing your food in a certain way and like different flavor combinations, because
Yeah.
I think if you do eat a little of each thing correctly, not correctly, because that's implying you know there's a right way to do it.
Yeah.
But if you sample a little bit, you'll have a better, an easier time with intuitive eating because you can actually listen to your body with how much you're eating instead of biohacking it randomly.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm loving how this conversation's going, because like I'll talk about something, you'll go, oh yeah, a couple of things what you were saying there, and then you'll go off and I'll go, oh yeah, a couple of things on that. But yeah, a couple of things on that. Um, so firstly, I just thought I love the way when I call it the food feelings diary and you call it the food mood diary. And it made me laugh because right at the start, when we were talking about how we were going to do each other's intros, and I said Nutri-iQ Radio, where we talk about food, fitness, and feeling good, you were like, God, so much alliteration, that's going to mess me up. And on the name, I've gone for food feelings for the alliteration, and you've gone for food mood with the rhyme.
Yeah, the rhyme, yeah.
That just made me laugh. But yeah, now I'm trying to remember what I wanted to say. Oh yeah, so where you were talking about how those competitive eaters add in a little bit of sugar to make it easier to then keep eating. That goes back to what we were saying earlier about how food companies develop food products with those different flavors to make you eat them and to make it easier to keep eating them. But just before I thought of that, something else that people often comment on and with my eating is that I eat really slow. So because I'm so particular with it and because I take time to construct it on my fork and then I eat it, people always say, you take so long to eat. Does it not go cold by the time you're finished? And I'm like, yeah, but that's the best part. And they're like, what? And for me, like I always say to people, often people who are overweight have this kind of, it's almost like a catchphrase of overweight people to say, I just enjoy my food. And I'm like, yeah, like that's food. That's all of us. But
Yeah.
I often kind of flip it and I say, but if you're just wolfing it down, how much can you really enjoy it?
No, you're not tasting it.
Yeah,
You're
and
not.
that's the thing that I do because I eat so slow. I say to people, yeah, I like when it gets colder because the flavors actually change as it
Yeah.
gets colder. And so it's like I get 2 or 3 meals worth of flavor in one meal. And they're like,
No,
you're
it's,
not, man, you're weird.
but it's true, man. Like we could keep talking. I know that we're running out of time, but I do want to.
Yeah, you got sessions.
I just want to. I do want to speak a little bit on that. It's true because again, like I said, my side of the family historically a little bit overweight. We also just eat like super fast, and I have to slow down. My daughter makes fun of me sometimes. Still, she's like, "You're gonna beat me," and I've been eating for half an hour already. And I'm like, "You're right. I should slow down. I need to be more mindful." But I do think that's true. It's like, oh yeah, that was good. Are you actually saying that food is good because you slowed down and tasted everything that went into it, the flavor combinations, the spices, the things, and how they pair together and how they taste? Or do you just have the concept of that this should taste good, so I'm gonna wolf it down and say, yeah, it tastes good because I know it historically does.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes, like you're saying too, and that goes into the fullness too. It's like it takes a while for your body to register what it's eating. So if you're eating too fast, you're most likely going to overeat because you don't feel full yet because that's a process through.
Yeah. Like you say, you've got sessions to get to, I think.
I do. Yeah.
So we'll have to start wrapping up. But something I wanted to, like I had lined up to kind of sort of try and finish on. We've kind of mentioned it, but something that, again, they mentioned in the show, where the idea for this show came from, was Freddie went and spoke to people that were still in treatment for their bulimia. And again, a common theme for them was that it didn't feel like a big enough problem a lot of the time to tell somebody. It's like, no, it's fine. Like I've got it handled. It's okay. And again, I think that's often an issue for us because a lot of people struggle with overeating. You can feel like it's not that big a deal. I don't need help with this. I don't need to talk to anybody. But again, it is. And the fact that it is a common thing means that it's okay to talk to somebody about it. Reach out. Again, it could be a professional or it could just be a friend. It could be us, like if you want to email either of us from this, you can email me for Shaun at nutri-iq.net. Would you have like a contact if people wanted to?
Yeah, Stephen.Opalenik at theprometheumproject.org. You can reach out to me at that address. It's a long ass email. I'm sorry about that, but
yeah, no, we'll put the links for them in our show notes for both podcasts, I'm sure. But yeah, the final slide on the show that I watched last night said eating disorder experts say if food or training, remember that purging element could be on the training side, creates anxiety for you, you feel like you have to do it. Or again, if it's binge eating and overeating and you realize after the fact that it's, it probably shouldn't be happening, if that's where the anxiety then comes from, just ask for help.
Yep.
Don't have to go it alone. You can speak to anyone. And yeah, that's where I wanted to kind of finish up. Hopefully the kind of examples we've given and the stories we've told of our own, kind of resonate with some people, and yeah, people feel able to reach out, especially men, which was kind of the point.
Yeah. And I would just add, it's probably one of the strongest things you can ever do as a person, to admit that you need help and to actually reach out to anyone who you feel comfortable with. I think oftentimes it's like, well, I don't need help. I can do this myself, especially in America, because America's like, oh, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, make it happen. But I think something my grandpa and my father taught me really early on was, even though I didn't listen, is the strongest thing you can do is admit when you don't have the answers and reach out for that help and that connection. So hopefully this has been helpful for some of you out there. Reach out to us, reach out to loved ones, whoever you need, and take that step.
Yeah. Like I say, a funny thing on, sort of men reaching out and opening up is last night when I put the story on my Instagram story saying that we were going to be recording this today, what it was going to be about, I was going to be opening up about my disordered eating that I haven't really talked about before. I got a few responses, a few emojis, sent as replies to those stories, and they were all from women. There never seems to be guys when you're trying to talk to guys saying, oh yeah, well done for opening up. And I watched a TED talk with, I can't remember his name now, but it's the main guy from Jane the Virgin. I don't know if you've ever seen it. But he does a lot about this kind of stuff, talking about like men opening up and kind of redefining masculinity and all of that. And he said, when he does that, all the engagement is from women. And you're like, come on, guys, I know you're there. I know you're lurking, but it's okay. Like, you can chat.
Take that step. So, sometimes that step is just a like or a message or something like that. Don't be afraid. We'll be posting more about it. So, if you guys are listening to that, go back and kind of reach out to people and people who are doing this and make some kind of connection. It doesn't always have to be like, hey, I need help. It can be like, oh, good podcast or good message, and then it can go from there.
I just wanted to ask a question about this, and then that's the conversation then. So, right, cool. So yeah, like I say, you got to go. I've got to get me dinner. Be ready for some with it.
It's awesome to reconnect and talk more.
Yeah, it's always good, man. We always get good stuff out on these. So, like we said, if anybody does want to reach out directly to us, you can reach me at Shaun at Nutri-iQ.net, and I'll put that link in our show notes, as well as Steve's, which is
Stephen.Opalenik at theprometheanproject.org.
Cool. Awesome. So that's the end of the show for Nutri-iQ Radio for this week.
And for Break the Chains, Find Your Flame.